Hello viewers, thanks for tuning in to another how-to video. We're going to be working on my 1995 Jeep Grand Cherokee. This has been a couple videos. I've been slowly fixing it up to go take it off-roading and stuff, but I keep getting all these I keep getting sidetracked by all these other projects I've been messing around with, so time to get back to it. And basically I'm just down to some like maintenance. So this video we're going to be doing the ball joints. It's probably well due for some fresh ball joints. Notice the tires, you probably can't see it in the camera, but I noticed just looking at the tires look like they were kind of leaning in like this. And I didn't want to wear out my fancy mud tires really quick once I start driving this thing around finally, so you know, I'm going to put some ball joints in there. You're going to need a ball joint press. Now you can rent those from your local parts store usually. I think they just charge you like the price of the tool and give your money back when you return it. Ooh. Also going to need some, these are just axle nut sockets, which are just basically really big sockets. Possibly need some snap ring pliers. I brought some of those along. And possibly you might need some 12-point sockets, which I don't have many of because they tend just to strip everything out. But I'll show you why. I might have to take the wheel bearing off one side, I'm not sure yet, and maybe you'll run into this issue yourselves, but let me get this thing jacked up and get the wheels off. Alright, I got the wheels off so you can see what's going on in here now. Basically what we got to do is get the spindle off, so anything attached to it, tie rod ends, obviously the ball joints, and the axle, brakes. So I got all new brakes and everything to put back on this too when I'm done. But we got extreme corrosion. So I don't know. I think the worst case scenario is I'm gonna have to, if I can't get this off, and even if I do get the nut off there, will it come out? Or is it going to be rust welded inside the bearing? If it is, and there's no way to get it off, I suppose I could just take the whole wheel bearing out with the axle still attached to it. It'll all come out. I'll have to get a new bearing and a new axle. This is the passenger side where I was showing you earlier. I had that super rusty axle nut and everything. Well, I managed to get the bolt off, or the nut. It came right off with my impact gun. The only thing I had to do is cut that cotter pin. Oops, I'm zooming in, sorry. I had to cut that cotter pin off flush because I couldn't get that out, but yeah, it came right off, and then I just pushed on this axle with my finger and I felt it go in, so it's not locked up in the splines, which is super lucky. I've had that happen before where you're beating on this axle to try to break it loose from the bearing, but we're good. So I'm actually going to film the other side because I got more room over there to film. Okay, so I just got the other side tore apart, so I know what I'm doing now. So let's get started. First thing, I'm going to remove this tie rod, and that's going to make it so we can steer this thing back and forth easy to get all the bolts. So take this little cotter pin out. Now if yours is rusted in there, it's to where you can't get it out, then you're just going to have to cut it off flush with the nut here and then spin it out. Spin the nut out with it in there still, and then drill out the hole in the tie rod end. But Unless you're changing it, then don't worry about it. You just throw it in throw the whole tie rod end in the garbage and get your new one out. But I'm not changing mine right now. Okay, so we got that pin out. We'll put a new one in when we are done. Our big impact gun on there. Okay. Now how you get this off is we're going to take our hammer, our sledgehammer, and we're going to hit it right here on the metal. I don't know if I can do this one-handed. There, just like that. You hit it right here and it will shock this and break it loose from its taper. So now we can turn this thing back and forth so we can get at the rest of the bolts a lot easier. So next, let's get the brake caliper off and then the brake disc. Very tight. Oh, there we go, finally. Put that over here where it's not hanging off its hose. Okay, now we need to get this brake rotor off of here. Now, like I said before, I'm going to replace these brakes, so I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive. Get them off. Get right on the friction surface there. Then there's this little thing in here that that pin locks into that we take off. Tin thing. And then we take the nut off in there, which is this is where you need your axle nut sockets. So I got my 36mm and our impact gun again. Yep, it's off. And then, is it loose? Yep, we got lucky again. So I always just push on the end of the axle stub here to make sure it's not seized up inside the splines of the bearing. Pushes in a little bit, you're in business. If not, you might have to do some stuff like hit it with a hammer, air chisel, torch, just depends on how bad it gets. Usually just at work, there's always like an indentation right here in the center of the axle. A lot of times I have a bit for my air hammer that goes in there, and that's what I hit it off of. That way I don't damage the threads or anything. But this one doesn't have threads right at the beginning of the shaft. They start about 3/8 of an inch back, so you could probably hit that with a hammer to try to free it. You know, whatever you gotta do. Now is where our splined, our 12 spline socket comes in handy, because we need to take the wheel bearing out. So it's a 13mm 12 spline, and there's 3 bolts that hold this bearing on here, because we actually have to take the axle out to get to get the spindle off. So 1, 2, over here, 3. That's the back side of them. So you can see there's one right there. There's another one hiding underneath this ABS wire right there on the top. And then there's one just back in here. You probably can't see because the light's not over there. So like if these were going to be super tight, I would probably get the torch out and heat them up, heat the flange of the wheel bearing up where you can see the end of the bolt poking through, just to avoid stripping the heads out, because then you're going to be in for an adventure if you do that. So okay, now we need to break this bearing loose. So I'm just going to hit it with my big sledgehammer right on top of where the wheel bolts onto. And I'm going to hit it just as hard as I need to. The other side came out pretty easily. These don't stick in there very far, so they don't get too seized, it doesn't seem like. Not like a Ford. Okay, now we can remove our drive shaft. There you go. Set this off to the side. Now all we gotta do is take off the upper and lower nuts for the ball joints, and then we can get our this spindle off here. Top ball joint nut is right there. I believe it's a 22 millimeter, and I just cut the pin out of there flush with the nut, so my wrench will slip over it because it was seized in there, and I'm replacing it anyway, so I'm not going to fight with it. And I did the same thing to this bottom one, cut that pin off flush. So yeah, let's get them two loose. On the top one I'm going to use my wrench. I'm going to use the boxed end of my 22 so we don't strip it out, and the bottom one I'm going to use my impact gun in a socket. Oh, yep. It spins off a little bit harder, but once you turn it like that, you pretty much, it cuts that pin out of there, and you're pretty much good to go after that. So now that I got it cracked loose, I'll switch over to the open part of the wrench. It's a little easier. So 34 millimeter is what I got that'll fit. I think it's actually a standard size. I don't know. So that lower one's out. Now we got to do the same kind of thing we did with the tie rod end. I'm going to hit it with a hammer right in this zone, but probably on the other side. But right here to try to crack loose the taper of the ball joint so it'll come off. Same deal with the bottom. Actually, I might hit the bottom one right on the end of the stud here. Since I'm replacing it, I don't care if I mess up them threads. So let me hit this top one a couple times. Okay. And hit the bottom. And then boom, we're loose. Oops. Forgot to take off ABS sensor. So, I get to do that, or you'll do what I just did. Okay, now that we got the spindle off, we can go ahead and push these old ball joints out of here. Now there's no snap ring or anything to worry about. They just push in and push out. Because of the way that they're in here, they kind of hold themselves in place with the spindle, because you got this one has to go down and this one has to go up. So when they're connected with the spindle, theoretically they can't, you know, fall out, basically is what I'm saying. Maybe that's why they didn't bother with a snap ring, I don't know. Anyway, we've got a big C-clamp press, so let's do the top one first. So you need to find a cup that will fit around it, just like that. You don't want to be on the collar, you want to be on the actual part of the axle here. And then we're going to push that ball joint up inside of this cup. And we just find another one that will fit on the bottom. I'm going to try this one, I think. It'll fit around the ball joint stud and meet the bottom right here, that metal part. So that's what you're pushing against. Now, I did the other side already, and this doesn't push in that far, so it doesn't look like this will fit through that hole. But if we get that far into it, but I think this is what I used for the other side, and it worked. So let me get the C-clamp and start pressing this thing out of here. My extension is the handle off my floor jack. Alright, try not to scrape the paint off my fender. That cup has a window in it so we can watch the ball joint when it starts to move. Fell over. But there, it finally broke loose, and you can see how it lifted up. So I'm going to continue reefing this out of here, and then we'll start on the bottom one. Okay, so I got my clamp set up on the lower one now, and I did it differently than I did the other side. The other side I had the C-clamp the other way, and I was having to turn it down here with my regular wrench. But then I put it on this way. Now I can use the DeWalt to spin it instead of me. So we'll see if this works. So I got a big cup on the bottom that ball joint should be able to pass through, and then a small one on top to push it down through the hole. And you want to make sure that the pressure is going on this cup, because I had to get the long one to make sure it wasn't hitting this up here where the upper ball joint goes, because if it was, you'd be pushing off this. And I'm sure this is pretty strong, but I don't know if it's strong enough to, I didn't want to risk bending this. I don't think it would bend, but it might. So anyway, be wary of that, so you're pushing off the cup. And let's get this one pushed out of here and spin it with the big impact gun. Have my gun set to full power is what's going on. Alright. So that was way easier. back this up. Knock it out the rest of the way, I guess, if possible. There we go. Okay, so I went ahead and pushed mine in. I'll show you how you would want to go about doing this. Start with the bottom one, and you want to push against this ridge right here. Let me get my light. You see, you want to push against this ridge right here, and you don't want to damage this rubber boot, so you just take that off. That just pops right off there. You push it in with that boot off, so you'll find this guy here. You can go around the stud and push against it, the metal right here on this collar, and then on the top you just need a cup big enough that the ball joint should be able to pass through until you see that it's fully seated. That collar right there is fully up against the axle hole, whatever you want to call it, ball joint hole. And the same deal with the top one. You find yourself the cup. This one's pushing it back down. So there's your ridge you want to push against. So that cup right there fits that perfect. And then on the bottom, you use a big cup that the ball joint can pass through without touching. And then you just squeeze it, and it goes right in. It goes in way easier than they come out. Before I go any further, I'm going to do myself a massive favor. And you got the hole here for your pin. And I'm just going to turn the whole stud to where it's going to make it easiest for me to put that pin back in, because it's pretty tight on this Jeep, so you don't want it to be that hole facing a direction where it's like almost impossible to put the cotter pin in when you get your castle nut on. So I'm going to try facing them this way on both, and I think that should be good. Alright, let's get our spindle back on. Don't put it on upside down. I think the tie rod is in the front. So just line up our ball joints. Oh yeah. That, we got our brand new castle nuts that came with our new ball joints. Big one goes on the bottom. Tighten them up and then put our new cotter pins in. We got our ball joint nuts on there and the pins installed. And it feels really nice, like brand new. Next thing we ought to do is throw the axle back in the hole. Throw that back in there along with the wheel bearing. And then the last thing I'll put back on is probably the tie rod end. That way I can move this thing around to access all the bolts behind easier. Try to hold the axle up while you guide it in, because it's going to want to fall down. There we go, that's all the way. On like that. Let's see. Because it's got to cut out back here, that's where your brake caliper is going to be. Let's get our bearing and our backing plate back on. Dust cover, whatever you want to call it. Oh yeah. Put our 3 bolts back in, and move on to the next step. Alright, now that we got our nut and washer back on the axle, we got to torque it down to a particular torque. I have this little pamphlet that has a bunch of specs in it, and it's telling me 175 for these. You might want to, do your own research so you can confirm or deny that. But That's what I'm going for on this one. So I'm going to torque that down. Stick your screwdriver in the vent so it can't turn on you, and we'll move on to the last couple of things. To put this thing back on, it goes over top of the nut, and it has a bunch of slots cut in it, so your pin that you put back in the axle will keep this from backing off. So you just put it on until one of those slots line up, and I got in my bag here a brand new pin. It's a pretty massive pin, a little bit longer than what you need, I guess, but we'll get it wrapped around. Doesn't get around that wheel. We'll put their tie rod back on, and that's probably where I gotta call it, because as you might imagine, my brake calipers are seized up. So I gotta get some new ones before I can finish putting the brakes back together. Well, I might as well end the video off here since I can't put my brakes on, but make sure you use new pins in all these castle nuts. When I get it all done, I'm going to go ahead and grease everything. I'll just grease the front end, but make sure you put some extra grease in there, but don't blow the boots out. And also, I forgot something. The ABS sensor. Don't forget to put that back in. It goes right here. You'll remember where it goes because you took it out, but yeah, and then I'm gonna have to take that nut off the upper ball joint because that's where this goes, the bracket that holds the cable. I had that tucked away so well, I forgot all about it. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.